I'm Zach Brooks, and I'm the owner of the Arizona Worm Farm. We turn garbage into food. We want to do away with garbage. Garbage, food waste predominantly, put into a landfill produces methane gas, which is one of the most damaging greenhouse gases that there are. Food waste fed to a worm or an insect produces no greenhouse gases at all. So we can take things that is waste and actually a dangerous product and turn it into something that's valuable for our community. It's widely reported that somewhere between 25 and 35% of all food grown in the U.S. is eventually wasted. It's not consumed. That means that 25% of the water that we use is wasted. It means that 25% of the transportation and the oil and gas and trucks that we use to process that stuff is wasted. It means that that packaging is excess. So if we can reduce our food waste down to a tiny amount, we can grow everything that we need with a third less water and a third less fossil fuel. Vermicomposting is the process of feeding decomposing material, both carbon sources like extra tree leaves and ground landscape mulch, and extra food waste, feeding it into a worm and producing fertilizer as the culmination of that process. So vermicomposting is a way of creating organic fertilizer for plants, introducing microbes into our soil to give us a living, healthy way of growing plants from things that would otherwise produce toxic or other waste. So it's important because it can let us grow organically in a very healthy way and take garbage that we don't need and use it for that process. Food waste, worms, water. We take food waste and we put it in with the worms, and the worms do everything else. Takes 4 to 6 weeks for a worm to fully consume most organic material, and then we harvest their poop, harvest their castings, and we use that castings in our gardens. Worm composting is super easy. We teach classes here at the farm and we can show you how to do it, but we can give you a handout and it's available online. Anybody with food waste, anybody with a garden wants to have a worm composting operation. We can, in my house, in my home, we can literally throw 0 things away as a result of having a worm composting process. We can take all of our green waste and all of our browns and compost them using the worms to the point where we throw almost nothing away. The cities are, for the most part, woefully inept at recycling material. If you want to make sure that the material that that is a byproduct of your daily life gets recycled, you should have a worm composting operation. You can absolutely do a worm composting bin in a tiny apartment or in a gigantic house. But anybody who has a yard, anybody who has a vegetable garden, anybody who has fruit trees, we can take your garbage, run it through a worm, and produce the world's best fertilizer at 0 cost in perpetuity. I love to travel. And there are a number of places where you go where the amount of garbage in the oceans exceeds the amount of fish that are there. There are parts of our country that are buried in the waste that we use. Single-use plastic bags is an example. We use them for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, and then they get put into a landfill where they last for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's unacceptable for us to do that to our children. A zero-waste lifestyle isn't any harder, it isn't any worse. All of the pleasures of today's life can be accomplished without producing waste as a byproduct of that. My favorite Native American saying is that you don't inherit the land from your fathers, you borrow it from your children. Well, we've borrowed this land from our children and we ought to turn it over to them in at least as good a condition as we got it. And if we don't, we're setting up a situation where our children and our grandchildren will really not be able to have the same quality of life that we have. And so to be moral, responsible individuals, to take care of the land and of our children the way we ought to, we need to reduce the amount of waste that we do. So everything that we do here at the Arizona Worm Farm is designed to figure out how to do that without living in a yurt in the desert someplace and sweating in the summer and freezing in the winter. It's designed to figure out how to run a comfortable, upper middle class life without producing a lot of waste. There are 100 things that people can do, and just pick one and do it. Don't use a straw the next time you're at a store. The next time you're shopping, buy products that not only say they are recyclable, but that say they are recycled. Get a worm composting bin and take your own garbage, and instead of throwing it out and putting it in the landfill, recycle it and use it as a fertilizer for your lawn. Buy LED lights. That's not very hard, and it reduces your electric consumption. The next step is to put solar panels on your roof. The next step is a battery system where you use your own electricity and you better insulate your house. There's 100 different things that you can do, and all of them incrementally will produce the outcome that I think we all want. The single most important thing people can do is to vote. Single most important thing people can do is to insist that our government, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter, be responsive to our ecological needs. Because as a U.S. government, investing cooperatively in the science, we can overcome all of these obstacles that people talk about. We can just science the crap out of them and get them done, but it takes the right kind of money and the right kind of motivation and the right kind of leadership to accomplish that. So lots of things you can do individually, and you should. Lots of small steps that are easy to take, and you should do them, and vote. Vote for people that are eco-conscious. Vermicomposting is the direct way to prevent food from going into the landfill and instead converting it into something that can be useful in your garden. Any garden, any lawn, it has value. Worms are awesome animals. Worms consume things as they decompose. They take toxins out of that thing, whatever it is, and they produce a really, really high quality fertilizer, and they increase the microbial content of the things where that fertilizer goes. Without worms in the forest, there'd be piles and piles and piles of leaves. You couldn't walk through that. Worms convert what's in that waste into microbes and things that plants can use to regenerate themselves. You don't need to feed them every day. You don't need to water them every day. They never need a bath or a walk. Worms in a worm bin can be managed as actively or as passively as you want. I frequently have bins that I ignore for 6 or 8 or 10 weeks. The worms do fine. At the heart of it, they're bugs, and bugs are hard to kill. They'll do well all by themselves all the time. There's an awful lot of stuff that you can do actively to compost stuff. Worms are absolutely the lazy man's way to compost. We stick the food in there, and we put a little bit of water in, and we leave them alone, and the worms do all the rest of the work. So we don't have to do anything at all. We don't have to actively manage them. Put stuff in there, the worms eat it, the end result is fertilizer. We sell worm bins to 2 types of people. We sell worm bins to eco-conscious people that want to ensure that their waste gets composted, truly doesn't get into a landfill. That's a really good reason to get a worm bin, is to reduce and eliminate the amount of garbage that you have. We also sell to backyard gardeners and people that have fruit trees and lawns and other things that need to be fed, because it really is the world's best organic fertilizer, and it's absolutely free. Once you buy our worm bin, you'll take your garbage that you would ordinarily just be throwing away, and all those Amazon boxes and leaves and other junk mail that gets shredded up and put in there. The worms will consume it and produce awesome fertilizer. So if you want your backyard garden or your fruit trees to be a success, then you get a worm bin. For me, having a worm bin, I understand that any waste that I produce, I want to put in that worm bin. And so I think about what I'm buying to make sure that the things that I'm buying can go into that worm bin. Cardboard works great. So if I'm given the option between paper and plastic, I choose paper because paper goes in my worm bin and my worms consume it. So it changes the way I think about the things that I consume. It also changes the quality of the fruits and vegetables that I'm able to produce. So I get excited when I go outside and there's a big, giant, juicy red tomato that I grew and that I can eat and that I can consume without wasting anything at all. So on a macro level, worms and regeneration of soil are critically essential to the long-term health of the planet. Worms and active soil, lots of microbes, healthy soil will absorb carbon out of the air. Plants, trees, and healthy soil can take carbon that's creating greenhouse gases that are heating the planet, can actually be absorbed into the soil. Worms help that process to capture and retain that carbon. By increasing the amount of healthy organic growth on the planet, we bring down the temperatures. We bring down the temperatures first of our neighborhood, and then of our city, and then of our country, and then of the world. We have only red wigglers here. Red wigglers are awesome composting worms. They're the Cadillac of worms. We grow them here predominantly because they stand temperature extremes the best. They're pretty fat and happy between 30 degrees and 90 degrees. And in our bins here outside in Arizona, we never worry about them on the cold side. We take care of them a little bit on the hot side, but they operate widely in that area. They're fast breeders, they're active eaters, they're good composters, they don't wander off. It's just a really good composting insect. Our worm composting bins are 17-gallon bins that we get from Lowe's. Super cheap, super easy. We put in some bedding, which is any sort of brown waste that we get. We put in some green waste, which is the leftover vegetables, and then we put in worms. And that's all it takes. We feed them our green waste whenever we have it. We add some brown waste to match the green. Super simple. It's just quick, easy. They don't bark, they don't cry, they don't wander away. They'll just compost your food and turn it into the world's best fertilizer. Every once in a while, we'll get husbands and wives in here where one or the other is hesitant to bring worms into their household. What we find is that the worms, they're just silently doing their job. They don't require a lot of care. They'll just eat your garbage and produce fertilizer. Very, very low-key pet, quick and easy to take care of. It's a nice addition to the family. It'll get you thinking about zero waste, which we think is important. It'll help you reduce the amount of things that you throw away, which we think is important. It'll help you grow your vegetables and fruits and lawns, which we think is important. There's really no downside to having worms in your house. A properly run bin will not smell. It will not have an odor. You come out here to the Arizona Worm Farm, and we're processing 120 cubic yards of rotting garbage every single week. It does not smell. Your bin won't smell. Now, you do something wrong. If you overfeed your worms, you can get a slight odor, but there's ways to resolve that right away. Well-run, well-regulated bin will not smell. If it starts to smell, that's your early warning system that you need to do something different. And that different is super easy to do, and it makes the smell go away. And the worms won't wander. So once these worms they're lazy and fat and happy where they are, where they're fed. So if you put them in a bin, you don't need to worry about waking up one morning and finding worms all over your backyard or your kitchen or wherever you keep your worm bins. They stay home, and they just eat what we feed them. So for me, it's one of the best things you can do with your kids is to say, look how easy it is to reduce the amount of waste that we have. We should have less and less and less waste. So if we don't change our trajectory, when they're your age, they'll be facing a very different kind of lifestyle than we have here today. And that's not okay. And so we teach them to do the right thing now, and we collectively act now, then they have this lifestyle. We're sitting out here in a 70-degree day, and it's beautiful. If this goes up 10 or 15 degrees, if they can't play outside, if they can't grow their own food, it's just a very different world. And so that's why I feel such a strong obligation to take an action now while we still can and can make a difference. And so one of the most important things you can do is to teach your kids how to take care of the planet in really a very simple and straightforward way. Your kids will like it. They'll have fun with it, and it teaches them an important lesson about what we want them to do and how we want them to act. We don't want to limit their choices. We just want to give them the same choices with a better outcome. So we're not telling them don't eat an apple. We're telling them don't buy 12 apples and only eat 6. We're telling them that what's left when you're done eating that apple doesn't go into a landfill where it'll produce methane gas. It goes into a worm where it doesn't produce any greenhouse gas, and the byproduct of that goes on the apple tree that you plant in your backyard, so they understand where apples come from. In my own life, I find that by having zero waste as a goal, I'm not nowhere near achieving that, and I'm nowhere near. If I want something and it produces some waste, I do it. I'm not saying I don't do that, but it gets me focused on thinking about where can I get healthy foods that aren't wrapped in plastic? How can I get Amazon to deliver something to me in a container that I can recycle? I mean, those are the things that I think about all the time. And it's a nice byproduct, and it's a nice lesson for our kids. How long does it take to get proficient at worms? For most people, the easiest thing to do is to come to some place like the Arizona Worm Farm and take a class. In an hour, you'll learn everything there is to learn about taking care of worms. And from then on, the vast majority of our people are completely successful at it. You can buy your own bin. For most people, it takes 1 or 2 tries to get it right. There's a lot of information on the internet. They're bugs, and bugs are hard to kill. We pay tons of money to all sorts of pest control people to try and get rid of bugs. They're just bugs. And so it's relatively simple, it's relatively straightforward. It takes us about 45 minutes to explain every aspect of worm care and worm breeding. If you want us to help you, come down and we'll teach you how in a class. If you want to do it, there's all kinds of online instruction on how to be successful with the worm bin. The short answer, 45 minutes worth of education and you're set for life.